That day, as the police department received an important report from an archaeological institute, they quickly arrived at the place. Mr. King, the head of the research team, together with his subordinates, were there to welcome them. Mr. King expressed his gratitude towards the investigation team led by Officer Chow. "Thank you for your arrival here, Mr. Chow." Officer Chow asked Mr. King about the mysterious disappearance of the dead body, as he demanded him to tell everything he knew about it. Mr. King said the ancient mummy they had previously found suddenly disappeared last night, 3 days before his excavation team had found an ancient tomb in the mountain. The tomb was located deep in the forest and was discovered by some hunters who immediately reported about it. To avoid damaging the objects which were buried with the tomb, Mr. King asked his subordinates to carefully remove them. As the coffin was finally carried out of the grave, Mr. King stared at it in amazement. The coffin was covered with an extremely fine paint. According to Mr. King, the paint was created way back to the Qing dynasty. Having years of experience in this field, Mr. King carefully inspected the outside of the coffin before removing its lid, as he wanted to make sure there was no toxic gases bottled up inside it.
Wow.
Everyone was in utter shock to see what was inside the coffin. It was a dead body that was still intact, dressed in a Qing dynasty costume. But the horrifying thing here was that the body had a wooden beam in the middle of its chest. One of the workers blurted out that the body was that of a living dead, while another guy claimed the corpse was of an older religious group that created the living dead. Both theories of the workers made sense to Mr. King, as he believed the coffin had something unusual in it. One of the workers also added that there must be something sinister going on with the corpse since it was pierced with a wooden beam. Mr. King felt worried as he gazed at the corpse. Part of it was because he had looked up lots of information about ancient graves before. The worker told Mr. King about the story he'd heard before that the dead would awake if one removed the wooden beam out of it. Mr. King pointed at the corpse, telling others to look at its teeth. How terrifying. There were sprouted fangs inside its mouth, which meant that it had gone to the final stage of transforming into a demon. It would be an absolute horror if the corpse awoke from the dead. It would definitely bring calamity to humanity, as those who got bitten by it would become zombies instantly. The director of the Archaeological Institute slowly approached from behind, laughing loudly as he said their theories were utter nonsense. The man didn't believe in the existence of zombies in real life. He yelled at the workers, then walked closer to the corpse. The director then pulled out the wooden beam out of the dead body, then told the workers to bring it back to the institute so he could get it to the museum for display a week later. The excavation team brought the coffin and the corpse back to the institute afterwards. But last night, someone had broken into the place and stole the body. Mr. King accompanied Officer Chow to the room where he kept the dead body. The other officers started investigating the scene carefully. The only evidence they could find was an odd-looking handprint left on the door. Officer Chow asked Officer Ping to give him an investigation report. Officer Ping then pointed out something bizarre about the incident, as based on what they had found at the scene. It looked like the corpse had left the place on its own. Chow was surprised to hear it, as he found it too unbelievable. Indeed, there were no signs indicating an intruder breaking into the room. As they were heading back to the police station, Chow quickly went to see his boss Lu to report to him about the incident.
What did you just tell me? That the corpse had awakened from the death and left on its own?
Mr. Lu said. Lu asked Chow if he had fully investigated the scene. But Chow reaffirmed his belief to his boss that the dead body had indeed maneuvered. Later that afternoon, while Chow was analyzing the details he had about the incident, suddenly an officer came in, informing about a murder taking place, and Chow was required to arrive at the scene. Chow asked the officer what had happened. The officer told him the murder took place early this afternoon at a market located in the suburb. A woman was approached by a strange man as she turned to see him. She was terrified by the look on his face. The man looked like a psycho. His eyes were bloodshot. Mouth was wide open, revealing the fangs as he unexpectedly attacked her. The man rushed to her with a tremendous force. He bit the woman by her neck as he slowly sucked blood out of it, which looked just like a bloodthirsty monster. After killing the woman, the man continued to chase after others, causing them to frantically run away. Now, as the police had arrived on the scene, the man was seen completely transformed into a zombie. As the cops fired shots at him, he let out an aggressive growl, then collapsed on the ground. Now everyone could clearly see the sharp fangs bearing out and his red eyes. Officer Chow realized this place was near to the Archaeological Institute, which aroused his suspicions about the mysterious disappearance of the corpse inside the ancient coffin. Chow was in panic to see the scene appearing before his eyes. There were around 5 dead bodies laying on the ground. Chow ordered his subordinates to conduct an extensive investigation into the murder case while performing an autopsy on the dead bodies. The following day at the police station, a tense atmosphere prevailed in the room. Mr. Liu was furious as the situation seemingly got out of control.
God damn it! These journalists are a bunch of fools for spreading the news of zombies killing people!
The article stirred up rumors that the corpse had killed countless people, which struck terror into the people as no one dared to go outside. Mr. Liu lit a cigarette to calm himself down, then asked about the investigative process. Officer Chow told him that they were waiting for the results of the autopsy. Mr. Liu ordered Chow to go to the forensic laboratory to hurry them up, as this murder case needed to be solved as soon as possible. If the process took any longer, social chaos would be sure to break out. Officer Chow followed his boss's order. He hurriedly went to the laboratory as the results of the autopsy had also come out. Inside the lab, the forensic pathologists were working tirelessly to speed up the investigative process, thus avoiding the situation from getting worse. As soon as Officer Chow asked him about the examination results, one of the doctors said that he would be amazed by what they found. The doctor showed him documents of the autopsy results. Chow expressed sheer amazement as he inspected the files. The pathologist also added they had discovered a fact that all the dead bodies carried rabies virus in their blood cells. But the odd thing was, the virus had mutated and become much more complex, hence taking more time for the doctors to examine it thoroughly. One thing about the corpses that terrified them was that they all had bite marks left on their necks, which totally confused them. Officer Chow thanked the doctor, then said farewell to him as he brought the documents back to his superiors. A month later, as the investigation seemingly reached a dead end with no new information to be found, more victims claimed by the mysterious murderer had spread panic in the police station. Mr. Liu expressed his anger as he ordered everyone to put all efforts into solving the murder case. Meanwhile, people were advised to wear masks in order to protect themselves from the strange virus, as the press had made the situation become more serious. That afternoon, at the police station, as everyone was having a meal talking about the murder case, Officer Ping said that he had just received a report from a civilian on the sudden appearance of rabid dogs in town. Many people were bitten. The situation worsened as the dogs lived in the area with those that had rabies all ended up being infected. Chow underestimated the situation, as dogs carrying rabies wasn't something too abnormal to him. But Ping told him that the serious problem here was lots of people having been bitten by the rabid animals, which came as a surprise to Chow. Normally, dogs with rabies would die after they bit someone, but these ones were different as they still survived while becoming stronger and ferocious. Chow got up, told everyone to move to the area immediately as no delay could be tolerated. Chow and Ping skipped their lunch. They hurriedly set out to the area that was invaded with rabid dogs. The car stopped in a suburban town. There was no one spotted at the scene, which meant that they must have evacuated. Ping felt a bit of insecurity as the place was filled with utter silence. Sensing something dangerous, Chow told his teammates to be careful. No sooner had Chow gotten out of the car than he heard strange noises. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a dog came into his sight. Chow was stunned to see the thing appearing before his eyes. The dog with the bloody mouth and bloodshot eyes was growling aggressively. It was infected. By the look of the dog, Chow could tell that it wasn't carrying normal rabies. In just a blink of an eye, the dog rushed to Chow. Chow reflexively rose his arms to defend himself from the attack. Blood was splashed as the dog bit him. As Ping witnessed Chow struggling with the ferocious dog, he immediately got out of the car to assist his friend. The man pulled out his gun, intending to take down the dog if necessary. Chow quickly hit the dog with a hammer, which made it jump backwards. However, shortly after that, the dog got up. It seemed like the hammer hit didn't do any harm to it. The bloodshot eyes of the dog, together with its aggressive look, gave Ping a firm impression that it had been infected. The dog was almost like an immortal, as a hammer hit it on the head would make one faint easily, let alone get up and attack. Ping asked Chow if he should shoot at the dog. Since the situation going in this town was more dangerous than Chow thought, he suggested returning for more reinforcements. However, as soon as Ping went back into the car to start the engine, he was shocked by what he saw.
Officer Chow, you need to see this!
Ping yelled loudly. Behind them now, many other dogs slowly came out. The officers were surrounded by the scary, aggressive dogs. Now it was impossible for them to return. Chow suggested to climbing on the roof, as it was the best thing they could do under the circumstances. He pointed at a high wall and then told Ping to run towards it as soon as he gave a signal. The two of them ran headlong to the wall. From behind them, the ferocious dogs were growling angrily, chasing after them. Chow and Ping made a high jump for the wall. However, both of them froze as they witnessed a horrific scene behind the wall. There were dead bodies on the ground, while some people were seen standing in a bizarre manner. All of a sudden they turned around, looking creepy as their mouths were covered with blood and their eyes were lifeless. The creepy-looking people suddenly rushed towards the two policemen. Chow and Ping was frightened. These people were just as crazy as those rabid dogs. It seemed like the whole town had been infected with the virus. In a moment of carelessness, Ping almost slipped down, but thankfully Chow was able to grab him in time. The officers were temporarily safe as they stood on the high wall. However, it was a serious dilemma for the two as they were surrounded by a pack of aggressive dogs and a group of crazy people who wanted to eat them alive. Walking along the wall, the two managed to get to the roof. Now, as they were standing on a higher spot, they realized the situation had become worse than they thought. There was nowhere else for them to escape. The whole place was filled with infected people. They were moving like dead people, but somehow behaved threateningly. Realizing the extreme danger of the strange virus, as it had caused everyone in town to turn, Officer Chow suggested finding a way to escape and call for reinforcements. Unexpectedly at that moment, the two heard someone calling them. There was a woman and a little girl waving for help. It looked like they hadn't been infected. Chow told Ping to cover him from above as he came down to save the woman and child. Without a bit of hesitation, Chow climbed down and went to save the two. The woman burst into tears as she told the officer that everyone in town had gone crazy. She and her daughter had been trapped here for 2 days. Then Chow helped the woman and her daughter climb onto the roof. The situation became extremely dangerous as noises of doors banging were growing louder. It seemed like the aggressive monsters were about to get inside. The door bar seemingly couldn't hold any longer as the monsters kept screaming and banging, which attracted more of them to the place. Officer Chow hurriedly pushed the woman upwards to the roof. All of a sudden, Ping yelled loudly. He told Chow to climb up quickly as the monsters were about to enter. Chow gazed at the door. He instantly got frightened as the door bar was about to break. In just a moment, the door was bursting open as the infected rushed towards Chow. The monsters were fast and agile. They also had long canines, which made them look extremely ferocious. Realizing it was too late to keep climbing, Chow felt a surge of panic. The group of crazy people frantically attacked him. Chow instantly knocked down a guy from behind with his elbow. As he was surrounded by these ferocious madmen, he kept throwing punches at them. However, these people no longer felt pain as they stood up immediately and continued to attack Chow. Chow needed to get out of his mess quickly. As the right moment had come, he quickly jumped onto the wall. He tried his best to climb while the crazy people were underneath him, aggressively rushing towards him. One of them grabbed Chow's leg. From above, Ping was grabbing Chow as he tried his best to pull the man up. As the monster clung onto Chow's leg, he was injured as blood spilled out the moment he pulled up his leg. Chow breathed shallowly. What a narrow escape it was. These people were so strong and ferocious. Chow suggested that they needed to leave this place before it was overrun with zombies. The two policemen led the woman and her daughter to a safer shelter. They stopped at the terrace as it looked quite safe to them. Chow told everyone to stay quiet as noises could lead the zombies to them. Since it was too dangerous to get back to the car and call for help, Chow said that he had come up with his own plan. The man turned his gaze at a haystack, saying that he could use it to make a signal for help. The group waited until the sun went down, then burned the haystack in the hope that the burning object would send out signals to the police. The little girl asked her mom if the zombies would break into and find their whereabouts. Officer Chow quickly reassured her, saying the police would arrive and save the four of them. Chow then asked the woman what had happened to the civilians. The woman said a few days ago everyone in town suddenly acted bizarre after they ate a pig. That day, the dog of the village chief had bitten a pig to death. The pig owner demanded the village chief to pay for it as he wanted to settle the argument peacefully. The village chief agreed to the man's demand, thinking that the pig was only bitten to death by a dog and would be a waste if he dumped it. The chief decided to cook it as he gathered everyone for a feast. The people in the village were all invited to his house as they feasted on the pork. All of a sudden, they behaved oddly as they fought and killed each other. It was fortunate for the woman and her family to avoid the horrific incident as they didn't come to the gathering. Bing abruptly held out as he saw the rescue team arrived. They finally saw the signal for help and brought the whole team to save the survivors. Many police cars had arrived at the scene. The soldiers were all equipped with antivirus equipment. They used tranquilizer guns to shoot at the infected. The zombies, after being hit with the bullets, somehow returned to normal as their eyes were no longer red. The two policemen, the woman and the little girl were all safely rescued. Later, the police imposed a blockade around the whole town for decontamination and disinfection. Now, at the military hospital, Officer Chow had fully recovered after 2 days of treatment. All the wounds on his arms and legs had been antiseptic and bandaged. Chow expressed his gratitude as the research center had developed a cure, or else he would be infected with a strange virus. But the examiner said it was not over yet. He told Chow to follow him to the morgue as he wanted to show him something. The man removed the veil of a corpse, then told Chow to look at the bite and then the dead body. He was aghast to see the wound on it. This was the man that was first infected with the virus. However, the bite on his neck had a strange looking shape. Chow asked the doctor if the bite mark was from the missing mummy. The doctor looked at Chow, saying it was a warning sign that must not be ignored. This man had indeed been bitten by the mummy, which meant that the virus was originating from that. Inside the mouth, the canines have grown long, which served as proof that he had transformed into a vampire after being bitten. Chow told the doctor that if the process for cure development was delayed, there would be a lot of people, including him, being turned into bloodthirsty monsters. The doctor agreed with his statements. It was fortunate that they had stopped in time, or else it would be a doom to humanity. The next day at the police station, Mr. Liu once again became angry as the press still reported news about the missing of the ancient mummy. Later, he ordered the police officers to find out the mummy at all costs and burned it as it was the only way to make things right. As Officer Chow walked out of the room, he had a feeling of worry. There must have been someone behind the mysterious disappearance of the ancient corpse. And for that reason, he couldn't make certainty of anything until he found the mummy.
This story is about Jiro's family, who just moved into a new house. The couple also had a lovely and obedient little daughter named Anna. While her mother was busy moving stuff, little Anna enjoyed jumping and running around. Then she opened the window to see what was outside. It seemed that the scenery outside did not disappoint Anna. A cool and gentle breeze blew in. It excited her, so she called her mother. Hearing her call, Yuki ran to her. The scenery behind was beautiful, just like what the family desired for so long. The pond behind the house refreshed the air. Jiro's family even planned to breed some fish in that pond. However, Anna was curious and asked her mother why no creature existed in that pond. Yuki couldn't really explain. She pulled Anna inside to help tidy things up in time for dinner. But it didn't stop there. An incident happened to their family on the first night in their new home. At midnight, Anna started twitching. She had a pale face and was sweating profusely. The little girl suddenly had a high fever. Seeing Anna's appearance, Yuri was extremely worried. Anna's condition became worse and worse. She began to tremble and breathe strenuously. Seeing this, Jiro and Yuri hurried to get a thick blanket to cover her body, but it didn't get any better. Yuri was so worried that she could not sit still. Looking at her child with such a high fever, it creeped her out. Suddenly, Anna woke up, but her condition was still very bad. Not only that, she also seemed very panicked. Anna, after waking up, got into Yuri's lap and hugged her tight. Her small arms clutched her mother's shoulders fearfully. After a while, when she was more settled, Anna stammered out a few words. But Yuri didn't really know what her fear was. She then gently reassured her child's safety. The little girl was in her mother's arms, taking a deep breath and then pointed at the wall. According to Anna, she saw a man and a woman standing just next to the closet. Their faces were swollen and disfigured, as if they had been immersed in water for a long time. Their looks were terrifying. Jiro and Yuri looked towards the closet, but did not see a single figure. Anna was hallucinating, wasn't she? Although they could not see anything, both Jiro and his wife had a bad feeling about this. Feeling like something was wrong, Jiro then told his wife to take care of his daughter and he would go outside to get something. After saying this, Jiro rushed outside with some kind of plan. Just a few minutes later, he came back and in his hand was a large knife and a wooden cutting board. According to Jiro, when he was a child in the neighborhood, there were many children like Anna, who always said that they could see ghosts. And the grandparents would use a large knife and a cutting board to make noise. This would drive away those souls every time. While making noise, Jiro also shouted loudly, asking the ghosts to leave his house and let go of their daughter. Yuri watched her husband's actions, hoping everything would be fine. Thinking that this new house had a problem, the next morning Yuri called her mother to help. Anna's grandmother saw her current condition and was also very surprised. However, before coming here, she also invited a feng shui master to help. The feng shui master looked around the house. He said the house currently had a strong, miasmatic atmosphere. and that the lake behind the house was the most serious problem. Anna's grandmother also told him in more detail about the two ghosts that Anna saw last night. Listening to the appearance of the ghosts soaked in water, his gut told him to ask everyone to go to the back of the lake. Arriving at the lake, they did not see what the master was looking at, but his face immediately went sharp, frowning and looking panicked. It seemed like he saw what Anna saw last night. On the pond surface now floated two extremely scary ghosts. Because he was used to seeing ghosts, the feng shui master could still remain calm. He just slowly turned his back and walked like nothing happened. Anna's grandma and Yuri saw the expression of the master and were very curious. But when they tried to ask, he just kept silent and said nothing. After coming back in the house, the master still refused to say a word, only carefully inspecting the wall next to the closet. Even the mold on the wall was very carefully examined by him. Jiro and Yuri also saw these stains when they moved in. Finally, after a long silence, the master said that he saw a man and a woman above the lake earlier. After listening, Yuri and her mother-in-law immediately panicked. They did not expect that about the water pond in the backyard. Also, they did not expect their long-time dream home to have such a terrifying secret. Not only did the two souls still live there, but they also wanted a child. And Anna was the one that the other two spirits were aiming for. According to the master, the only way to now help Anna is to get out of their sight. He advised them to make a paper dummy to deceive the two spirits. That night, following his instructions, Yuri brought a dummy that looked exactly like her daughter to the edge of the pond. First, she burned some votive papers. She silently pleaded to beg the two souls to liberate and spare her family. When the flame got bigger, Yuri threw the prepared paper dummy in. Then she began to beg, hoping that the two spirits would accept the child she had sent to them and let go of Anna. Yuri's request just stopped. The fire instantly grew louder, burning the dummy. It seemed the devotion of the mother had been accepted by the two souls. After doing exactly what the feng shui master told her, Yuri got up and went back to the house. The fire was still burning, but it was getting smaller. Beside the fire was water, and it suddenly moved in a vortex that grew bigger and bigger. Yuri could hear the water, but she just glanced without daring to turn back. On the pond surface were the two spirits. They were holding the hand of a little girl and walking away. In front of the window where the pond can be seen, now stood a mirror. And because of the mirror, Anna had not seen the two spirits again. A few days later, after hearing the news about Yuri's family, all the neighbors came over to visit. Just like what the feng shui master said, the two souls were a couple, but their families forbade they be together. So they committed suicide. There were many people who moved in here, but all of them had to move out within 3 days because of their harassment. To be sure, Yuri sewed a curtain placed in the window where the pond could be seen. And since then, nothing weird happened to their family anymore.
Two years ago, for the convenience of work, I moved to live in an apartment near my company. That afternoon, after coming home from work, I sat on the living room sofa and watched TV, as usual. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. At that moment, I thought I heard wrong, or the people outside knocked on the wrong house, because I did not know anyone in this apartment complex. But then the knock on the door continued. The outsiders claimed they were the police. I was very confused. Why are the police looking for me? When I opened the door, it was true. There were two policemen standing in front of me. They said they wanted to get some information from me to assist with an investigation. Although I was surprised, I quickly regained my composure and agreed to the police's suggestion. Very quickly, the policeman pulled out a photo of this woman from his pocket. He asked if I had met this person. The woman in the photo also lived in this apartment and has been missing for many days. I told them I didn't know the woman. Then they told me the woman in the picture was missing. After that, they greeted me and continued to knock on each door to ask about the whereabouts of this woman. The police did not specify why she went missing and how long she had been missing for, but I didn't care much about this either. A few days later, I seemed to have forgotten this, until one night. That night, with overtime, I came home late and was about to get into the shower. It was 11 p.m. I know that taking a bath at night is not good, but if I don't take a bath, I can't sleep. This time of night is the most relaxing time for me. I let my hair down freely and bent over to wash it. The strands of hair flutter in front of my eyes, but enough for me to see the void ahead through my hair. And then suddenly, I saw a pair of bare feet standing in front of me. I am sure my heart stopped beating for a moment. Feeling scared, I immediately raised my head. I reached to close the running tap. Every hair on my body was standing up. Looking around once more, I gradually calmed down. I thought maybe I was seeing things. It was just an illusion. But then, a thought flashed in my mind. I gradually felt the surrounding air become dense and colder. To prove that what I was thinking was just bullshit, I decided to try it again. I slowly lowered my head and glanced over the hairs in front of me. This time, no longer barefoot, standing in front of me was a woman with shoulder-length hair and her hands hanging down. I panicked and shouted, then fell on the floor. The woman disappeared once again. I reached out for the towel and hurried to cover myself, then ran out of the bathroom fast. Until I lay on the bed, I was still trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep because I was still so scared. After that night, I no longer dared to bathe at home. I have a colleague who was single, and she was very happy to help me with this. The strange thing was that while at her house, nothing happened to me. My colleague assured me that it was just the new apartment that made me feel this way. I also hoped that everything would be fine. After spending a few days with my colleagues, settling down and feeling my mood regain balance, I returned home. At home, I rarely cook, but I had a habit of boiling water for myself with an electric kettle to drink, rather than ordering the water available in the apartment. Every night, before going to bed, I had a habit of drinking a glass of warm water. This made it easier for me to fall asleep. Indeed, after drinking water, I lay in bed and tried to fall asleep. But for a long while, I felt the air around me was extremely cold. The cold and floating feeling made me feel like I was being immersed in water. Suddenly, I felt short of breath, and my chest felt heavy. Then, I saw a floating object in front of me. I was speechless, unable to realize what it was. As my eyes gradually adjusted, I realized it was the figure of the woman with long, loose hair. The woman was moving closer and closer to me. Right now, I couldn't help but just stare at her with wide eyes. As her face approached me, the feeling of fear grew larger. It was a swollen and slimy face, like a corpse that had been soaked in water for a long time. The patches of skin on her body peeling off and fell into the water disgustingly. The person moved closer, almost on top of me. I was too scared that my hands and feet were stiff, unable to move. I just gasped and stared forward. I shouted out in fear, giving all my strength to try and get out of the situation. When I sat up in the bed, I realized it was just a dream. Even so, until a while later, I still felt terrified, wondering who she was. Why did I see that woman so often? The nightmare made me so anxious the next morning. I dragged my heavy footsteps out of the house warily. Missing notices are posted everywhere in the apartment corridors and staircases. It was an image of a lost woman. I suddenly realized something. How did that monstrous spirit resemble her so much? As I was thinking this, I was about to raise my hand to take a photo to get a closer look, but I suddenly felt scared. Really not wanting to believe it was true, I tried to flip through it to stop thinking about it. When I stepped out of the gate of the apartment building, I saw a group of old women gathered and gossiping. I'd never communicated with them, and neither did they, but it was strange, and when they saw me passing by, a woman took the initiative to call me back. She asked me if there were any strange smells in the drinking water, like a dead mouse. She then asked if I had sleep paralysis lately, or had dreamed of ghosts. Another woman also mentioned the woman who had been missing for many days, all of them seeing her ghost. I was startled to react at this time. It turned out that I was not alone with this problem, and all of these people were like me. All of them doubted that the polluted water had anything to do with her. They must report this to the police. A few hours later, the police arrived. Everyone living in the apartment building was making a fuss. The police were now checking the water tank on the top floor of the apartment building. Something must have happened with the communal pool on the rooftop, for sure. That explains the problems they'd had recently, as well as the stench from the water. After watching the police pick up a body, everyone became extremely scared. After bringing a swollen, rotten body out of the water tank, they continued to use a fishing racket to remove something from the inside. It was scary, because the victim's whole body was decomposed in the water tank. What the police picked up might be the fat and rotting meat. When the police took the body out of the apartment building, everyone could smell a terrible stench that followed. The police also arrested the missing girl's husband and escorted him to the station. A few days later, the case was made public in the newspapers. The real killer was the husband of the missing girl. He killed her and threw her body in the pool terrace on the roof of the building. After everything was cleared up, I was sick for a long time. Every time I think about drinking dead body water, I feel very nauseous.
When the night fell, we once again sat down in a circle to hear the wonderful stories being told by my grandmother. That night, my grandma told us a scary story of a sea monster that loved to eat children. Needless to say, all of us were terrified yet curious at the same time. We asked her about its appearance, what the monster looked like. Was it long or short, or did it have many sharp teeth? Seeing us speaking chaotically, my grandmother told us to stay quiet and stop interrupting her mid-sentence, or else she would not tell us the story. We then told her that we would remain silent and not ask anything. Under the dim light, Grandma started narrating the story. It had happened 20 years ago, back in the day when misogyny was still a thing, as people had strong prejudice towards women. Out of curiosity, I asked my grandmother what misogyny was. She explained that it was the hatred for women or girls, as people had a tendency to respect men while disdaining women. My grandma raised a needle to my face, saying that she would sew my mouth up if I continued to interrupt her, then moved on with her story. That day, Mr. Kang's daughter-in-law had just given birth to a baby. However, he wasn't happy with it as he looked worried. The man had been thinking a lot, as his son and daughter-in-law were still struggling to have a baby after 10 years, and the fact that it was a baby girl made him feel truly upset. Thinking about the neighbors laughing at his new family when they found out about his new grandchild, the man felt even more disappointed. But anyway, he had to go check on his newborn grandchild. Having mixed feelings, Mr. Kang blankly gazed at the baby lying neatly in the arms of his son Ken, but the look on his face started changing as he smiled cheerfully. Turned out it was the adorableness of the baby that put a smile on him. Even though she was crying, yet she still looked as beautiful as an angel. Ever since that moment, Mr. Kang had a sudden change in his thoughts. He was no longer bothered about his grandchild being a boy or a girl. As he carried the baby in his arms, his eyes were filled with happiness as he named her Tani. As time went by, the baby had now become a little girl who was able to run and sing. One afternoon, as Mr. Kang was taking a stroll with his granddaughter, he bumped into an old friend of his who was also being with his grandchild. The man instantly bragged about his grandson as soon as he saw Mr. Kang. He later made some rude remarks about Tani. "Is this little girl your granddaughter? She looks lovely, but such a shame that she's not a boy." Mr. Kang was extremely annoyed by those ironic words from his friend. It wasn't the first time for Mr. Kang to deal with such unkind words, as he constantly heard people in the village saying bad things about his family. As Mr. Kang took his grandchild to go fishing, they encountered a group of people who were terribly rude to them.
If I were Mr. Kang, I would definitely strangle that little girl to death, right the moment she was born, since I couldn't stand being humiliated. The
guy then bursted out laughing. Everyone knew that he was just making a joke, yet it made one feel extremely uncomfortable to hear it. Of course, Mr. Kang didn't care about those nasty words as the two kept going to the fishing spot. However, as the night had already fallen yet the two hadn't returned, Mr. Kang's wife and son hurriedly went to the riverbank searching for them. But there was just a hook, an empty bucket, and a fish spotted at the scene, while Mr. Kang and Tani were nowhere to be seen. The two called out their names loudly, but received no reply. A while later, the couple saw a figure appearing in the middle of the river. It seemed like Ken's mom had figured out who it was. She immediately panicked. Ken quickly ran to the spot as he got closer. He gradually understood what was happening. Turned out that the one in the river was Mr. Kang. Ken and his mother quickly asked him about Tani, but Mr. Kang just remained silent to their question as he lifelessly looked at them, then slowly dived into the water. Feeling worried, Ken told his mom that he would jump into the river and save his dad, or else Mr. Kang would die from exhaustion. Ken quickly swam to his father. As the two finally swam ashore, he asked his dad what had happened. Filled with horror, Mr. Kang breathed shallowly as he told his son that Tani had been caught by a sea monster. Ken's face instantly changed color. Shortly after that, Mr. Kang's wife asked the villagers to help them find Tani, but their efforts were in vain. Many of the villagers believed that Mr. Kang had brutally killed Tani due to his strong dislike for her, but the family members refused to go with it. However, they still wanted to find out the truth. Mr. Kang stayed quiet for a while, then recounted the tragic incident to them. He and Tani were fishing at the riverbank. As Mr. Kang had been sitting for a long stretch of time, his legs were all numb and tingled. He got up, intending to walk around for a little. Of course, the man didn't forget to caution his granddaughter not to go into the water. Then he turned around and performed some exercises to relax his body. All of a sudden, a loud noise from behind startled him instantly. As he turned around, he saw the water surface slowly rose as it gradually formed a huge mouth in the middle. As Mr. Kang was still in bewilderment, he immediately got shocked to see his grandchild Tani being swallowed into the river. The man screamed loudly, but it was too late. Without hesitation, Mr. Kang quickly jumped into the water looking for his grandchild in panic. He desperately searched for her, but his efforts were in vain. The disappearance of Tani made him feel extremely guilty, as he believed it was entirely his fault for not protecting her. The man also added that the sea monster had returned as it went to the river through an estuary. Being stricken with grief, Mr. Kang's hair turned grey quickly. It's not to say that he had to come under bitter criticism from the villagers, as they believed he was the one that killed the little girl. As time went by, one day his eye suddenly alighted a ray of hope. Unexpectedly, Mr. Kang got out of his house, something that he hadn't been doing for days. He even bought a coil of rope and some iron bars. As the man returned, he instantly went to the warehouse and locked the door tightly. From inside the warehouse, noises of materials clanging on the sound of hands sawing were audibly heard. His wife was really worried about him, as she brought meals to her husband daily, yet the man didn't eat even just a bit. Every afternoon she stood by the warehouse door crying, yet Mr. Kang never came out to see her. It was until the fourth day that the door was finally opened. Mr. Kang slowly walked out of the warehouse. Shortly after that, he assured everyone that he would go to the river and catch the sea monster at all costs. It turned out that for the last few days, the man had been making a big hook in order to take his revenge on the monster that killed his beloved granddaughter. His wife instantly stopped him, as it was too dangerous, but no matter how hard she tried to do it, Mr. Kang still ignored her and stuck to his plan, as he had nothing to lose now. The man went to a pig pen. He caught the fattest pig in the pigsty, grabbed it by the head and held his knife near the animal's neck, intending to kill it. He was acting like a madman. His wife collapsed on the ground as she saw blood spilling everywhere, while witnessing the violent behavior of her husband. After Mr. Kang slaughtered the pig, he continued to go to the riverbank. Everyone was freaked out. Their faces turned pale as soon as they saw him. It must be the aggressive look on his face that terrified them. Also, the bloody pig head, which was pierced with a hook that he was holding, made them filled with horror. Out of curiosity, the villagers followed him to the river as they wanted to know what he was up to. They quickly gathered at the place, talking loudly. Mr. Kang planted a large pole deep into the ground. He wrapped it with a rope, then tossed a hook and the pig head away. The pig head being thrown into the river made the water splash as soon as it touched the surface. In the jostling crowds of inquisitive individuals, some said Mr. Kang had gone crazy, as they didn't believe in the existence of a sea monster in the village. But the man wasn't discouraged by it, as he grabbed the fishing line firmly, waiting for the monster to come out. 1, 2, and then 3 hours had passed, yet nothing happened. People started leaving as they assured themselves Mr. Kang had gone insane. Mr. Kang still patiently waited for the monster. His eyes started to get heavy, then slowly drifted into sleep. But the man couldn't even sleep peacefully as he saw the face of his granddaughter in his dream. Tani was like a little angel with her plump angelic face. The little girl walked closer to her grandfather as she put her tiny hands on Mr. Kang's face, trying to awaken him just like she usually did when he fell asleep during fishing. Mr. Kang quickly got up as he heard Tani calling him. Right that moment, the fishing line suddenly became tight, as if something had been caught on the hook. In the river, waves were seen slowly forming as the water flowed ceaselessly. Knowing the prey had been captured, the old man hurriedly retrieved the fishing line as he felt something moving strongly in the water. The string rubbed against his fingers, causing them to bleed. He tried to lean backwards whilst using his weight to pull the thing out of the river. A painful expression was clearly shown on his face as he frowned and grinded his teeth, yet he still clung onto the string. Realizing how useless it would be if he only used his hands, the man tried to place the fishing line on his shoulder. The great force caused the string to get tightened and cut his shoulder as blood dripped out of his wound. The monster was indeed powerful, as it floundered him with just a single movement. Mr. Kang quickly clung to the wooden pole he had prepared before. But the man himself couldn't fight back the monster on his own. He started trembling with pain as the cut on his shoulder became deeper. In the water, the sea monster was moving its tail violently, but his sheer willpower didn't allow him to give up easily as he continued to fight the monster for the whole night and collapsed later in the morning. At that moment, there were some people walking by. They were in utter shock to see Mr. Kang being badly injured. Both his hands and his shoulder were covered with blood, his face contorted with pain, yet he was still holding the string. Seeing something bizarre in the water, the two men tried pulling the fish line and instantly felt its tightness. They quickly called the other villagers for help. Indeed, there was something really heavy under the water. Unexpectedly, the thing that Mr. Kang was fighting all night long was a huge fish. The size of its head was even bigger than that of a car. It was at this moment the villagers firmly believed that a monster had taken shelter in their village. As they pulled the monster out of the river, the villagers removed its guts. How terrifying it was! Inside the guts was a human skeleton, which was believed to be of Tani. My grandma sighed deeply as it was the most haunting part of the story to her, which upset her every time she recounted it. My younger sister was also unhappy with the ending as Tani had died so pitifully. She asked my grandma if Tani was the same age as her. My grandma smiled as she heard the question from my sister. She nodded her head while saying that Tani was a wonderful little girl, yet had to die such a tragic death. My younger brother said the villagers were just evil, but my sister said it was also evil of the sea monster to kill the girl. I then told the two that the villagers were just as bad as the monster. The three of us had a quarrel over who was the most evil of them all. We kept arguing until our grandmother told us to go to bed as story time was over. We couldn't even close our eyes as we kept thinking about the tragic story. I asked Grandma if there was any giant fish in the lake behind our house, but the reply to my questions was her loud snores.
As I remember, this story began when I was only 7 or 8 years old. Back in my village, I used to play with Ben and Leo because not only were their houses next to mine, but we also got along very well. We often played by a pond, which was at the far end of the village, near the edge of the forest. One day, as soon as we got to the pond, we heard strange sounds coming from it, and we saw a lot of frogs, so we walked closer. Since we were young, we decided to throw stones at them. Watching the frightened frogs jump away, we laughed excitedly. Meanwhile, Ben was looking at something below the water, maybe because he didn't want to play our boring game. When I tried to throw a stone again, Ben told me to stop. He thought he saw a big fish underneath the water. When we looked down into the pond, we saw a fish swimming around a big, strange rock. It was the first time we saw this fish, or any fish for that matter. So we decided to get into the pond to take a closer look. But while we were about to jump into the pond, it suddenly started to rain, heavily. We were all surprised, because the day had quickly turned from a nice sunny day into a dark, stormy one. So we decided to run straight back home. That whole day, the rain kept falling. We stayed inside, for we couldn't do anything else in that weather. After the rain had passed, the air became cleaner, so we started our day as usual. Strangely, we felt uneasy, which seldom happened to us. The first person to get that feeling was Leo. He mentioned that he had a nightmare the previous night. Ben was next to comment about last night's dream. He made a serious and then awkward face. He had also had a nightmare that night. Leo believed that these bad dreams were because of the rain soaking us by the pond. But Ben disagreed. He stared into space with a blank expression. Then he said, "I dreamt of ghosts." It felt very real. I turned to look at Ben to ask him more about his nightmare. He quickly narrated what he had experienced in his dream the previous night. While trying to sleep, he got the urge to go to the bathroom. Half asleep, he got out of bed and went straight into the bathroom. Suddenly, as he reached for the toilet door, he felt a cold wind rush through his body. Ben was astonished when he saw what appeared to be a person coming out of the toilet. The person appeared gradually and became more visible. Ben panicked and shouted in horror. It was himself, or someone that looked like him. He froze in shock and was sure this would be the day he died. As he continued to observe the surreal event, the shadow walked past him. And, as it did, he felt clearly the eeriness and coldness coming from that weird entity. Then, slowly, the shadow moved into Ben's bedroom. He panicked and his face turned pale from the fright. Composing himself, he decided to use the toilet first. Maybe it was just an hallucination, he thought. The next morning, before going to school, he wondered whether he should tell his parents what he had witnessed the night before. After thinking for a while, he decided to tell his parents about this figure that appeared in his bedroom last night. When his mother heard the story, she looked annoyed. She said, "Ben, you have watched too many horror movies. You are obsessed with them." Discouraged and unconvinced, he then said goodbye to his mother and went to school. After Ben had finished telling his story to us, I wondered why I didn't see anything strange like that. We were so caught up in our conversation that we didn't realize we had arrived at school already. That day at school was a tough one. I couldn't stop thinking about Ben's story. It was just so weird. During class, he kept yawning and falling asleep. He showed signs of sleep deprivation. In the late afternoon, the three of us were on our way back home after school. On the way home, we met a woman who was holding a little boy in her arms. As soon as the boy saw us, he pointed at Ben and cried out loud. Startled, we looked at the little boy, then quickly looked at Ben in confusion. I wondered why the child had looked at my friend and screamed. But Leo chuckled and patted Ben's shoulder. He said that maybe Ben's face was too fierce, and this had probably scared the child to tears. On the way home that day, we had to cross an alley that was quite empty. Suddenly, a dog jumped out and barked at us. He stared at Ben and growled. His eyes turned red and looked very ferocious. We became frightened. Our faces turned pale. We didn't know what to do. At that moment, I shouted, "Run!" So we immediately ran as fast as possible. After that day, Leo and I came back to check the dog out again. It was clear that the strange dog was only barking at Ben, and he didn't behave the same way when we went back. I knew Ben seemed to realize that too. His face expressed obvious concern. The next day, we ran straight to the pond which we had visited the day before. The place looked different after the rain. The air was cooler and clearer this time. When I looked at the bank of the pond, I was surprised. It seemed like something had changed. I pointed to the water and told my friends about it. Under the water, the rocks, which we had seen the day before, were gone. Instead, large pieces of wood, which had probably come from the bottom of the pond, were floating. Maybe yesterday's rain caused the water in the pond to rise up. Suddenly, Ben called us and pointed towards something which was drifting in the water. I turned back to see what it was. It was an old, damp piece of wood. There were 2 frogs sitting on it. They reminded us about the frogs that had been on the rocks the day before. Then Ben asked Leo to help him explore the piece of wood with him. Why had it appeared near this pond? They jumped on it. Then they imagined they were on a boat and started using a long branch as a paddle to row. Ben asked me to join them. He looked very enthusiastic. They immediately took the other branch to push their boat away from the bank. Suddenly, the boat turned and leaned to one side, which caused Ben to fall into the water. Leo was also startled and couldn't keep his balance, so fell too. While watching, I panicked. I saw Leo swim up from the water. His body was all wet. He tried to cling onto a piece of wood in front of him and gasped for breath. It was very hard for me to pull Leo out of the pond, but at last I did. Normally, this pond was quite shallow. Why did it seem so deep that day? Leo choked on water, but managed to tell me that he couldn't see Ben anywhere. I ran towards the pond and called for Ben in panic, but the water was very calm, as if nothing had happened just moments before. Everyone in the village went to this pond together to look for Ben after hearing the commotion. This pond was very shallow now, and strangely, not a trace of Ben could be found. The big piece of wood was also brought out of the pond. Some soil was still stuck to it. The log was moldy and slippery, and it seemed that was why they slipped. The villagers decided to bring pumps. They plugged the pipe to suck up all the water in the pond. There were about 3 or 4 pumps which worked at full capacity until the job was done. It took more than half a day for all the pumps to drain the water. Once drained, at the bottom of the pond, people found a large wooden coffin. All the villagers were instantly terrified. The coffin was upside down, but people realized immediately that the piece of wood was the lid of the coffin. Some strong young men stepped forward and used their strength to turn the coffin up. However, because of the dirt stuck to it on the bottom, it was extremely difficult to lift. After a while, they managed to overturn the coffin to its side. Everyone panicked because there was a body inside that resembled one of a child. I saw then that it was my friend, Ben. Everyone looked at each other with tearful eyes. It turned out that the reason why Ben's body did not emerge was because it was stuck in this coffin. No one knows how it happened, but many can imagine that it must have been something terrible and supernatural that held him down. After Ben's demise, everyone immediately spread the word, and no one dared to come to this pond ever again. It later turned into a large trash hole.